Good morning, everyone. It's Thursday morning, 13th of February. As I stated in the devotional, it was 12 earlier, now it's 14, but it's still awfully cold here in Pineville, Missouri. I got 3 layers of clothing on this morning, trying to stay warm. I've been reading through this book entitled Phillips versus the State of Missouri. I'm ready for chapter 6, and I've entitled this, The Fire Intensifies. It's interesting because the scripture I used prefacing this chapter is the same scripture I used in our readings this morning in God Does Not Love Everyone, chapter 34. Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you as though some strange thing happened to you, 1 Peter 4:12. My life seemed to be in utter chaos. At this time, my son was very ill. My life at work was tremendously hostile. I began to sense a great spiritual warfare. Satan would continually attack my family and me through my son's illness and the fight going on in the workplace. I remember times I wondered if God really was going to intervene for me. Many doubts have plagued me regarding my son. There was a time when he was in 24-hour medical care, when his brain was producing a massive amounts of dopamine and the neurologist could not get the dopamine to slow down. The amazing thing about all of this is that God did sustain our family through the whole ordeal and is still sustaining us today. We still struggle with Mark today, some of his problems that he has with his mind. But while all this was going on, I often questioned God and His purposes in the situation that was happening. And I would be less than honest if I didn't say I still do that sometimes today. I always looked forward to Sunday service at church. It seemed that God's presence was very close and comforted our hearts. Finally, the doctors that had discovered a new drug that Mark seemed to be responding to. He's still permanently disabled today. He's at home with Mom and Dad who care for him daily. We thank God for the grace He has given us to care for Mark. We are very thankful for the progress we have seen through the medication, which he will probably be taking for the rest of his life unless God chooses to heal him. All of those who read this book, who know God, we ask for your prayers for our son Mark. The one homosexual supervisor who put out the AIDS pornographic brochure began to lash out at me verbally and in many other ways. He began to do everything he could to bring the whole agency against me. I was to learn much later in a court decision that he had called a meeting where a voodoo doll was named Larry Phillips and curses were put on this doll by sticking pins in the doll. I can laugh about it now. There was a copying machine back in his department that my department shared with him. One day I was back using the copying machine and the supervisor lost it. He called my supervisor and said that he wanted me out of his department now. I'll just insert one thing I've learned about the homosexual community. They have 2 sets of rules, one for them and one for everybody else. I also began to find my personal space invaded by this same supervisor on numerous occasions. Many times I would go to my work area in my desk, and I found this supervisor sitting at my desk. On one occasion, I came back from lunch and found saliva-soaked sunflower seeds in my work area. I never will forget the day this supervisor on one occasion came into my work area smacking a baseball bat in his hand. He was wearing a dog collar leather vest and leather pants. I guess he thought he could intimidate me into being quiet about what was going on. I was made aware of an important organization about this time. The organization was American Center for Law and Justice, headed up by J. Sekulow. This organization's mission is to protect Christians from discrimination in the workplace. I received a booklet from this organization outlining how to properly document discrimination in the workplace. I had no idea that later this organization would be my counsel that would win a federal lawsuit against the state of Missouri Division of Family Services for discrimination against me because of my religion, documenting incidences of blatant discrimination against me. The way to do this was by making daily annotations in my calendar. I also contacted the EEOC to find the proper method of filing a complaint. The investigator came out from the EEOC. I also registered a complaint against the homosexual supervisor who had been harassing me. Things were getting progressively worse. After the Congresswoman came to my defense by even contacting the Director of Division of Family Services, I found myself being transferred to another office. I could no longer retain my current position. I now found myself in the Office of Investigations of Child Abuse. My second supervisor made it clear the first day that she was very good friends with the homosexual supervisor, so I knew from the outset there would probably be no change from the retaliation that I'd been experiencing. One day I went to my desk and found a hotline report regarding the same lesbian foster parent that I had taken objections to being licensed a year ago. I now went to the home to find two girls, a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old. The 9-year-old expressed fear of being in the home because of what was going on in the home. I documented everything this girl told me and turned the report into my supervisor. She was furious and called me into her office. She stated that a foster parent's sexual orientation should not cause any concern for a foster child, and take this out of my report. I refused to do so. Consequently, the retaliation began again in many forms. I had to decide as to whether I was going to be in the master's program at the University of Kansas. Even though the tuition would be paid for by the state of Missouri, I began to have grave concerns about going through the program. I now had my yearly evaluation, and my first supervisor had created an epic of some 60 pages downgrading my work as a social worker. Later, the federal judge would state in her opinion that Larry Phillips suffered persecution because of his religious beliefs. Never had a derogatory evaluation been so long against a social worker in the agency. If I went forward with my educational plans to go through the state-sponsored master's program, I would have to sign a contract with the state of Missouri, agreeing to stay on an additional period of years to pay back for the tuition. However, the contract stated that if I were terminated, the money would be immediately due back to the state of Missouri. I now could plainly see that it was the management's plan to try to build a case against me for termination. I began to think about the other ways of supporting my family in case I was fired. Many of the social workers had secondary employment. Social workers just don't make that much money, and found often that they had to supplement their income in other ways. I had discovered a vitamin company which had excellent products. I began to sell these vitamins on the side to help supplement my income. The company had a weight loss program, and I had lost over 60 pounds on the program. Many people, of course, had observed my weight loss and wanted to get on the program. Like I said, the agency had many other social workers selling Avon, home interior products, Amway, Tupperware, etc. I received a call from the deputy coordinator's office that I was being investigated for my activities with this vitamin company, and I was to go to the state office of investigations to be interviewed. I couldn't believe that this was happening to me. I could see clearly that the management was going to try to create a second way of terminating me from my position. It was also a justification for having an investigator on me constantly. I got to recognize the investigator who had been assigned to follow me. When I would go to breakfast on Saturdays, or go to a health club on my own, or even have to go back to the downtown Kansas City office, there he was following me. I had accumulated some vacation time over the past years and was sorely in need of vacation. My wife and I decided to take a vacation. Upon return home from my vacation, I was approached by my supervisor and told that I was to go to the director's office immediately. I went to her office as directed. She immediately handed me an envelope and informed me that I was being terminated immediately, and I had 8 minutes to get all my stuff together and vacate the office, or she would be calling the police to escort me out of the building. The reason given my termination was inappropriate secondary employment. I couldn't believe I was being railroaded out like this. I later found out that 2 days prior to my termination, the state of Missouri received a copy from the EEOC giving me permission to sue the state for discrimination. So they had to do everything in their power to create wrongdoing on my part to cover the state of Missouri. Well, now I was out of a job, but frankly it came with some relief. I felt I had left a concentration camp, and my hopes and dreams of helping others were jaded by this evil and corrupt system that had brought me down. I knew it was not going to be easy getting employment, having been fired by the state of Missouri. I did not know that God would make a way for my family and me when there seemed to be no way. A local constitutional attorney in Kansas City had gotten wind of my termination. He felt I had a good case of religious discrimination against the state of Missouri. I went to his office and provided him with all the documentation I had been keeping on file. He agreed to file a lawsuit and take the case on a contingency basis. He forwarded all the information to the ACLJ's office, and ultimately Francis Mannion of their office flew to Kansas City to visit me regarding the case. Well, that concludes Chapter 6. I'm going to go on with Chapter 7 because it's relatively a short chapter. I call this chapter The Apathetic Church, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables, 2 Timothy 4:4. One of the most difficult aspects of my situation to deal with was the response of the churches. I was an ordained deacon at my home church, but I also had contacts with many of the other churches in the Kansas City area. I decided to keep them abreast of what was happening regarding the case. My wife and I faxed over 100 churches and got 2 replies. One was very negative. It was from the associate pastor, who stated that people like me were the principal cause for the problem of separation of church and state. He went on to say that he was against my cause, and his was for all his people's, and it was for all people's freedom to live their lives as they chose, etc. I made note of this church and realized they probably were also one of those churches that supported the ordination of homosexuals as pastors. God helps us. God help us. The more conservative churches just didn't want to get involved. They knew that this was a politically hot football and they didn't want to be in play. I found that they would address abortion, gambling, drug addiction, divorce, and many other sins, but they didn't want to deal with the issue of licensing homosexuals as foster parents. The idea I got about these churches was these are not our church members, so it's not really on our priority list. I was appalled that the churches was ignoring little children who would be placed in these environments. The reason the gays wanted so much to be approved as foster parents was to take advantage of a state law in Missouri, which says that once a foster parent has a child for 24 months, they have first right of adopting that child. So the gay foster parent had now found a legal way to adopt children in the state of Missouri. Another reason for the great apathy, especially in certain churches, was that our governor was the deacon of one of the mainline churches. Our governor was a staunch supporter of the homosexual movement in Missouri. In fact, I learned much later that he had taken a tremendous amount of money for his campaign from the homosexual community. As many know, our governor died in a plane crash. The last place he had gone before the crash was to a rally for his campaign put on by a group of homosexuals. When we were visiting one church where we were immediately chastised by one of the members of the church, she asked our names and we told her. By then the case was pretty much all over the news. She stated that she would never sue the state of Missouri, and that she felt it was wrong for any person who was a Christian to sue. I found out there is a great deal of confusion regarding this subject. The Bible tells us, let every soul be subject to the higher power. But it goes on to say there is no power but God. So our ultimate commitment needs to be to God himself, not man. Another consideration regarding apathy in the church is where our allegiances lie. Many church members and government employees, school teachers, police officers, firefighters, military personnel, nurses, etc., these folks often become intimidated by a liberal system. And with their cultural diversity trainings and the misunderstanding regarding the separation of church and state issue, refuse to get involved when they perceive that this could be a threat to their jobs and ultimately their lifestyle. Only a real revival initiated by God himself can change the hearts and minds of church members. Only God can give us the faith to stand against homosexuality, divorce and remarriage, abortion, pornography, and many of the other heinous sins that are endorsed by the broader culture. Well, I will conclude that today, and tomorrow we'll start in Chapter 8, the ACLJ brings hope. May the good Lord be with you today is my prayer. God bless.